I will start by saying, Dad, this is my father, Charles Willig Jr. And we are podcasting today with my dad, who was a 27 and a half year LAPD veteran, father of 6 boys who are going to be an interesting story when we get to a little bit of that, I'm sure. And he's up in Henderson, Nevada, and chilling with his house with his golf buddies around, and the things that he does up there as a retired guy now. And we're really glad to have him. And like I said, 27 and a half years on the LAPD, and Dad, we're glad to have you here, and glad that we get to hang out with you for a little bit and ask you some questions and get going. I think the first thing we wanted to start with was just kind of asking you to kind of introduce yourself, as far as, talk to us a little bit about where you were born and growing up, and kind of lead us just a little bit up through getting ready to come out here to California, and that'll be the first segment of what we want to know about you.
All right. Well, I'm 83 years old. I was born in 1937 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Went through 12 years of Catholic school there. 1954, joined the Navy Reserves while I was still in high school, because in those days everybody got drafted, so you had to do something. I graduated in 55 and went active duty with the Navy. Was stationed in right off the bat in Guantanamo Bay. Left there, came back to the States, went through school to be a hospital corpsman, which is a medic. And then I was stationed at the Naval Hospital in Jacksonville, Florida.
Wow, nice. What tell us a little bit about where you grew up, and your mom and dad, and just a little bit about your nuclear family. And
well, I have one brother, and it was my mom and dad, me and my brother, and we lived in a home with my grandmother and an aunt.
That's cool.
My father worked for the railroad. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. Lived in a blue-collar type neighborhood at the time. I thought it was great. I understand from everybody else, so is gone. My parents are both obviously passed away, and that was it. Aunts and uncles are all gone. So it's just
what was it like? What was it like growing up in that city at that time, and what was going on school wise with you and your brother and you guys?
I thought it was great. I mean, it was to me it couldn't have been any better. The only problem was that when I entered high school, all the Catholic schools canceled football, so we didn't have a football team, and my parents wouldn't let me go to the public school. So I ended up playing what we called, I guess it was a combination of, we called it sandlot, semi-pro football for the next 4 years.
That was tougher than the high school ball.
Well, it wasn't. Yeah, it was. And to let you know, it was the league that Unitas played in. Whenever after he got cut by the Steelers right out of college, and then he came back to Pittsburgh. He played in the Catholic school league when he was in high school.
Huh.
And he came back and played in the, like I said, we called it Sandlot League. And
is Johnny Unitas a little bit older than you?
Yeah,
or is he contemporary?
3 or 4 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's cool.
And
what was that like? What was playing that kind of ball like? What was it?
Well, I'm not sure how to describe it. There was no face masks, or we wore great big giant shoulder pads, not like they do now. They were massive things, and you weren't allowed to use your hands. You had to we used to grab a hold of the front of our shirts to make sure you didn't hold on to somebody. But the defense could do just about anything. And on defense, you could use your hands or your elbow, anything at all. It was great. I enjoyed it. I played with most of the same guys for 4 years. And then when I got out of high school, I went and tried out for a team that was a step up from that. I'm not sure how to describe it.
Like a semi-pro?
Yeah, it was. And but then I decided to go into the Navy. So I went and worked out for a couple of months with them, and then I decided I was going to go into the Navy. So I abandoned that.
Wow.
Tell us about the Navy. What was that like? What was your experience?
I enjoyed it. I really enjoyed being in the service. Like I said, I went to Cuba, which was sunny, and after being in Pittsburgh winters, and just of course you couldn't leave the base. That was whenever before Castro took over, he was just a rebel in the hills somewhere. So the base was completely surrounded by jungle. The only way you could get out was by boat. But it was, and I worked at they called it a dispensary, like a medical outlet at the airfield. And one time it was on a weekend, and I was just a lowly apprentice type guy, and there was we had a radio in there, and we got a call that a plane was coming in to land, and it couldn't get its wheels done, so we had to go down. As well, the guy who was the main man, he was upstairs asleep, and I had to yell to him, and he told me, go ahead and take the ambulance down. I'll meet you down there. Well, I had never, it was one of those big Dodge things like you see from the Second World War. I had never driven anything like that. It had about 18 gears in it. I think I got it in one gear, drove it down to the field. Luckily, the plane came in and everything was okay. It landed fine, but and I always thought, boy, I wish they'd let me drive that thing again. I wanted to try that again because I didn't know how to get through the gears. I got it in the one gear and rode it all the way down to the airfield.
Red line.
Never took it out until the guy finally showed up, the older guy, and he drove it back. But it was, other than that, it was, I worked in that, called a dispensary, guys would come for sick call and have all kinds of different things. And I remember the first time I gave a guy a shot, it was a shot for penicillin.
Oh, STDs, here we go.
Yeah, well, it was, the only place you could go from there was to a little town that had a couple of brothels and a bar, and that was about all. So coming down with the clap was a routine for these guys. And I gave the guy, I had never done it before, and the older guy was showing me how to do it. And I hit the guy in the arm, in the upper arm, and the needle goes all the way in and hits the bone in this arm.
Oh, geez.
Scared me to death. It didn't seem to bother him at all. And I backed it off a little bit, injected him, and that was it. Other than that, it was a learning experience. We were there to learn, and then only after that did they send me back to school back in Maryland, and I went through 6 months of school there. And then when I graduated there, I was assigned to the Naval Hospital in Jacksonville, Florida. On a ward, you only had like one nurse to 3 or 4 wards, so you were the guy that did everything. So,
was Guantanamo a detention center at that point, or had they not? It was just a regular base.
Yeah, just a regular base. Had an airfield and had a Marine detachment, and that was it. In fact, they had when I first got there, they said if we're ever invaded, everybody's going to have to take part in it. So they took us down and showed us. They gave us a shotgun, and I shot, I think, 3 rounds out of it, and a 45, and they shot 3 or 4 rounds out of that. That was your training. Okay.
Keep it close. Keep those guns close.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't even know the sailors, because when I was in boot camp in the Navy, the only thing we did is we did shoot a 22. Why, I don't know, but never anything stronger than that. So that was it as far as my training goes in that respect.
No, that's some high quality training. Now I can give you a little bit of background about the fact that when we were kids, my dad would say, "Yeah, you're fine," a lot.
Yeah.
Oh, my shoulder hurt. Yeah, you're fine. So I guess that training really came handy when you had kids.
The medic.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
If I can give you a shot, Chuck, if you want, you know.
That's great.
Actually, when I came home, I brought home, when I got out of the Navy and I came back, I brought a bunch of things back with me that I thought I might need, pills and different things that we had been giving out, but never ended up keeping them for years and years and throwing them away because
What year did you get out of the Navy?
1957.
Okay. And how long before then did you get married?
1959.
Okay, so you
Yeah.
get married and tell us a little bit about that.
Well, excuse me. Not much to tell. I'm married in 59 in April. My first son was born in December.
January of 1960.
January, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It's Chris and Krager in December.
Great.
January of 60. In 61, I drove to California with a couple of guys, took the test for the Los Angeles Police Department, went back home. They contacted me a couple of months later. I was accepted, and we moved out in July of 61, and I started the academy in July of 1961.
Wow. Where did you
Was
meet
that-
your wife?
Well, in those days, if you wanted to meet girls, dances were the big thing. They were everywhere. There wasn't a bar scene, and of course there was no internet or anything like that. So the only place you could meet girls was going to the dances, and you could go just about every night. There was a dance somewhere.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I met her, and my brother, oddly enough, met his wife at the same dance.
That's impressive. That's cool.
The same location. It was a couple of years later, because he's 4 years younger than me. So, and he had gone into the seminary while he was still in grade school.
Oh, wow.
4 years at the seminary, and then decided that wasn't for him, and came out and finished high school back in Pittsburgh.
That's crazy. That's to think back to when that was the cool place to go and go to dances and stuff like that. You had to have some moves and stuff. You had to have a little game.
And I'm telling you,
That's great. So, Dad, when you got to the point where you decided to come out and take the test, what was going on at that time in terms of your plan for for going forward? If you got the job or you didn't get the job, what was going on then?
I had a job for the city of Pittsburgh. I worked at traffic court, and I worked in the warrant section with all the policemen. That's what got me interested in being a police officer. And I took the test back there, and I passed it, but I wasn't a Korean veteran, and if you were a Korean veteran, you get 10 extra points. So, and they only hired maybe 20, 30 guys a year. So I was so far down on the list that I knew I wasn't gonna get it. And So I had run into a policeman from Pittsburgh that had been to LA, had gone through the police academy, graduated, but then his wife refused to leave Pittsburgh and join him. So he came back and got on the Pittsburgh Police Department.
Huh.
And I got to talking to him about the department, and there was a lot of articles at that time about LAPD, we had a guy named Chief Parker who had reformed the department, and then they had big stories in Life magazine, and there was a magazine called Look, which was similar to Life, and I read those, and it sounded very, very interesting. So I wrote to Los Angeles, to New York, and to Washington, D.C.
Wow.
And Washington, D.C., I never got an answer from them. New York wasn't hiring anybody from out of state. So I ended up driving out to LA and took that test. And they were looking for, they ran me through the whole thing in one weekend. I
Nice.
took the written test on a Friday, went down on Saturday and did the days we had a physical agility test you had to do. And I did that. And that was it. Then I just had to go home and wait to get them to notify me.
Wow.
So,
Was the psychological background a big deal? Because I know that it is now, and it's a little different, I'm sure. But did they do a lot of asking a lot of weird questions, or was it?
They sort of did that in the academy, and it wasn't. You were interviewed by a psychologist or a psychiatrist. I'm not sure what he was, but it wasn't any. I mean, I don't really recall. The only thing I do remember, and they did it with everybody, is they ask you to draw a picture of a tree. And how that brought out your psychological problems, I don't know. But I guess my tree was okay. So
I guess you could have had like a noose hanging down from the tree,
yeah,
and like,
well, yeah, no,
an owl and a raven.
and I guess if you had just branches with no leaves, that was like, there's something wrong with this guy. I don't know how they do, but everybody used to laugh about it because the guys would tell you what kind of tree and some would like a palm tree, and why they would do that. What would make a guy, draw something like, of course, they were from all over the country. When I went into the police academy, they were taking guys from all over the United States. So there was all types of guys that were there.
Huh.
How many guys were in your class, Chuck?
We started out with, I think, 90, but we lost probably, I want to say at least 20 of them through the academy.
Mm-hmm.
It was, in those days, it was a pretty rigorous academy. There was a lot, and I wasn't a big runner at the time, and there was a lot of running. It was the old academy was located up near Dodger Stadium.
Yeah.
In Legion Park. And so they used to run us through the Legion Park. And I like I said, the biggest thing with that was, and I wasn't good at it, is don't stop.
Yeah.
No matter what, you don't give up. As soon as you stop, they would come up, the instructor would tell you, move on. And if you said, I can't, boom, you went home. That was it.
Wow.
Yeah. So the big secret was don't ever stop, no matter how slow you're going or how much trouble you're in, just keep on going. And that was the idea, was that you don't, no matter what's going on, you don't just give up on it. So, but it was pretty physical. There was a lot of calisthenics in those days. Calisthenics, so there's no weightlifting. We didn't do anything like that, but a lot of calisthenics and a lot of running.
Was it boot campish, Dad? Was there a?
Oh yeah, oh definitely. We had inspections every morning. You had to have we wore a khaki uniform. It had to be pressed a certain way. You had to clean your gun every night. They inspected that every morning. We'd have to stand inspection, and everything. They were extremely nitpicky on it. That was all part of and it was it was a kind of a harassment to some degree. during the academy. Wasn't bad. I mean, it was no physical or anything like that, but you know, they were trying to push guys to see who would give up and say, I can't handle this. I'm going home. And that happened to a lot of guys. And in those days, they fired guys for very, well, I don't know, seemed to me minute things. We lost guys because some guys would, in those days, when your first day of the academy, they gave you a badge and a gun. So a lot of these guys were going out on their off-duty time and flashing their badge around and doing things. And we lost several guys that were doing things like that. Yeah.
Trying to avoid going to all those dances. You just flash your badge and get
Well, I don't know about what was going on. LA was a completely different kind of a dating scene than well, at that time I was married, but what I found out, it was more of the bar type thing, you know, in those days there. So it was completely different than Pittsburgh for sure.
Was there a culture shock a little bit being out in LA from being back in the East Coast? And we got there. I thought I had died and gone to heaven. The streets were wide and there was sunshine all the time, and the houses were all nice and clean. You know, in Pittsburgh, we lived in a house that there was no front yard. The houses were right on the sidewalk, the front door, and they were tied up against each other. So it's like you've probably seen in old movies, and that's exactly what it was like. So moving to LA was, I guess you'd call it a culture shock, but it was, to me, it was the best thing in the world. And
I think your wife must have thought you were a pretty smart cookie for bringing her out to LA. She's like, this guy's pretty sharp.
Well, it took her about 10 years, so she finally decided, okay, we're not leaving to go home. Go back to Pittsburgh.
She had one bag packed ready to go back to Pittsburgh, right?
Yeah, I mean, she didn't complain, but she if I'd have said, let's go back, she'd have jumped at it in a heartbeat. Yeah. But after a while, she got she became a California girl. Then later on, we'd go back to Pittsburgh, and it wasn't the same that we remembered. So it was not a place you wanted to go and stay to.
Did she have a big family in Pittsburgh? She
No,
left a lot of people?
She had lots of aunts and uncles, only one brother. But she was Lebanese, and they have a big family type connection. Everybody's a cousin. They even used to call me cousin. So
right.
Yeah, they're in that respect, they're very, very close. They do a lot of family get-togethers and things like that. So
So here you are in California and with the LAPD coming out of the academy. What was your first assignment?
I worked the Hollenbeck station, which is the all Hispanic. Down those days, it was all Mexican. That was I came out in October '61. So it was all Mexican. The funny thing was I had studied Spanish in high school for 2 years. And I don't think there was anybody in Pittsburgh that spoke Spanish, but it was either that or Latin. So
I took Latin. What a fool.
Are you using that a lot these days, Tom?
Yeah, very much.
The dummies figured Spanish is a lot easier than Latin. So yeah, I couldn't speak it fluently, but I did pretty good. I could understand, and I could get through. And then the station would every day at roll call, which was like the briefing you'd go to before you started, they would give you the Spanish phrase of the day, like what's your name, where do you live, and put your hands up, and and things like that. So
well, you could have practiced your Spanish down in Guantanamo at the bar.
never got, no, they all spoke English, believe me.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. No,
All dollars, no pesos.
yeah, yeah, it was only dollars. But the good thing was that all drinks were 15 cents.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
And mixed drinks, everything was 15 cents. So for a buck, boy, you could get smashed.
See, I thought dime beer night at Cowboy Country Club in Flagstaff was
Yeah.
was the deal.
Oh,
we were overpaying, weren't we? That's great. So what was Hollenbeck like? What was the beat? You know, the
It
daily.
wasn't a bad division. Wasn't considered one of the more dangerous or busy divisions. In the daytime, the officers rode one or two a car, and it was the typical things. Nothing really major. They had gangs. The first time I had ever had any contact with gangs, there was in those days there were maybe, I want to say 7 or 8 gangs that I can remember, but they didn't. There was no problems with the police, and they didn't really fight each other. They did, but in those days it was mostly fist fights or maybe a stabbing or something. Very little involving guns, and yeah, it was like I said, it was just a regular neighborhood. For the most part, there was no. They had some project areas, the government housing kind of thing. Some of them were a little bit rougher than others, but nothing really bad. It was a good place to work. I enjoyed it, and I only stayed there for a year. In those days, you got on what they called the wheel. You stayed at 1 year at your first division, 1 year at your second one, and then the third one you went to, you stayed there unless you wanted to ask for a transfer.
Hmm.
So, yeah.
So my grandfather is 10 years older than you, and he grew up in East LA. So he was on Hazard and
Well, that's it. That's where,
Brooklyn and Hazard.
yeah. Oh, that's where that was part of. It was Hollenbeck division to us, but it was
Yeah.
East LA. The people that don't know Hollenbeck, you tell them East LA. Yeah, Brooklyn. Brooklyn now is Caesar Shop.
That's right. That's right. So Brooklyn and Hazard, I used to go there all the time and clean up the backyards. Yeah. But he would, the reason it popped into my head is because he would talk about the fights, like we would fist fight, like, okay, we're going to go meet, and then we're going to at the top of the hill at Hazard, I guess. And we're going to go up there. We're going to punch each other. And then when we're done, we're going to pick each other up and dust each other off. And that's it. No guns, no knives, no nothing,
Yeah. And the gangs, we didn't have they weren't anti
Right.
in the violent way or anything like that. We used to catch them in the park and sit and drinking beer and confiscate their beer and things like that. So we weren't the most popular people with them, but it really wasn't, I'm sure, like it is now, or at least like it was later on when I was when I worked in South Central. It got a little bit, little more touchy down there.
What was the climate of LA at that time in terms of? Was there a lot of social unrest? Was it pretty calm? Who was governor and mayor and all that kind of stuff? What was going on there?
There was. I don't think that started until probably that I recall in the late '60s. Whenever they started the anti-war demonstrations and the civil rights demonstrations and things like that. But prior to that, there was some things that went on, but it never was. It was more in the news than anything. It wasn't anything that disturbed the social atmosphere of the city that I was aware of. But I worked most, as I said, from there. I went to South Central LA and I stayed down there for several years. And then as time went on, then the Black Panthers became a big thing. And then there were other groups that were in LA, but that only was, I remember towards the end of the 60s and then into the 70s.
So you moved from Hollenbeck and went to 77th at that time?
No, I went to Newton Street, which is
Shooting Newton.
Shooting Newton, that's the northernmost South Central division. It borders downtown. It borders the downtown area. And then south of that is 77th. I stayed at Newton for a year and then went to 77.
How was
And-
Newton? Was Newton shooting Newton at that time?
Yeah,
Or
oh, definitely. Yeah. It
Yeah.
was quite different. It was a lot of physical activity, a lot of there was
meaning a lot of fighting?
yeah, well, I mean, there was a lot of resisting arrest and
Mm.
I mean, it was a higher crime area, so we got involved in a lot more things and just let's see, I was still in Hollenbeck when they had a great big there was the black Muslims had their temple, they call it, their church, I guess it was, in South Central. And one night they had some officers stop there to find out the guys were selling clothing or something out of the trunk of the car, and they stopped to see what was going on, and it developed into a major brawl and shooting, and from then on, almost all the divisions in the metropolitan area went to two-man cars.
Wow.
We you had they were they were not the easiest people to deal with.
Right.
Yeah, they're very militant, so I left there after a year. Was Newton and went to 77th and stayed there for up until 68. Was there for the 65 Watts riots.
Tell us a little bit about that. I'm really interested to hear, read a lot about it. And, everybody, when you mention riots these days, everybody thinks about the Rodney King stuff. And it's almost a forgotten, event. But, if you go back and do some research, there's lots of information on what was going on during that time and a lot of information on the fights, between. There was a clear line drawn with the Black Panthers and the police department. And
Definitely, yeah.
So as that started, the riots started off, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about,
Well, it started one night, August the 11th, I think it was. A highway patrolman stopped the guy, which they didn't even usually, they stayed mostly on the freeways at that time, but somehow I stopped the guy for drunk driving. And everything, from what I understand, everything was going well, but they stopped him a couple of blocks from his house, and before they got him hooked up, his mother came down. Somebody notified her, and she started screaming at him and calling him names for getting arrested and stuff. Well, he then reacted, and the officers got involved in an altercation with him. And it was summertime in August, it was hot, and all of a sudden there was a great big melee going on, and the highway patrol called LA and asked for help. And we had just started work. I worked a shift. We worked from 7 in the evening to 3:45 in the morning, and we had just left the station, rolled down, and it went from there. It was
Wow.
what did it look like when you rolled up on that?
there was hundreds of people out, and of course there was cops came from everywhere, and they started throwing rocks and bottles, which was the norm, at us and stuff. But all we did was I think the only guy they arrested that night was that guy that was originally stopped, and we just backed out and left. Well, that was the going thing in the country. They had already had the big riots I think in Detroit and New Jersey.
Right.
Chicago, yeah.
So they started just pelting all rocks and throwing things at cars that went by on the main street. It was near Imperial Highway, and and then we'd get called back, and it just escalated, and then it kind of died later on in the night. And the next day we came out, I started again at 7 o'clock, and they had already started doing the same thing. They were throwing rocks, and they burnt up there was a news truck went down there with one of those trucks with a big satellite thing on it, and they ended up burning that thing up. So we went down again, and there was more arrests made. And of course, the more arrests we made, the more people showed up, and then that was Thursday, and then we came to work on Friday night, and things were going pretty good by that time. And we went to roll call where we got all the information. And we had the guy that was our lieutenant, the watch commander, was an old, well, he seemed to me at the time an old guy. I was pretty young. And he said, looting is burglary, that's a felony. And setting fires is arson, and that's a felony. And throwing rocks and bottles and stuff at the police officers, that's an assault, that's a felony. And we shoot felons. And the riot was just about over 2 days later.
Yeah.
I think 30 some, we heard 30 some people were shot and killed. I had always heard stories that there was several more than that just sort of slid by that nobody reported and stuff. But
Were the Black Panthers, did they get involved in all that? Was there shootings?
no, it was no. They were the Black Panthers by that time. I don't know if they were. I don't remember them as being a prominent thing. They only started that I remember back in the later 60s. After 77, I joined Metropolitan Division, and we were involved in a lot of that stuff. But so
They were probably still up in San Francisco at that time.
what's that?
They were probably still up in San
Yeah,
Francisco
they
at
were.
that time.
The
origin.
That was where they started up in those areas. Yeah.
Because Chuck, those guys always had the guns. You know, they were always walking around with guns. So I mean, that would have been an ugly thing during the Watts riots.
At the time, you never ran into guys with. I mean, if you had a 38, that was a big weapon. Well, when the Panthers started, they got into the automatics, 9mm. I never even knew there was a 9mm. I didn't know what that was. But yeah, then things, and we had several officers that were in big shootouts with the Black Panthers in particular. And then they had. And I can't remember what year it was. It would have been early 70s. We had when they had arrest warrants for all the Black Panthers, and there was a big shootout on Central Avenue in South Central LA, and they had taken over, or they are taken over. They had I guess their clubhouse or whatever, and they had it sandbagged inside and had it, it was like a fortress. So when the guys went to serve the search warrant, it ended up in a big shooting that lasted for probably an hour or better. And that was my first really connection in that respect with the Black Panthers. But,
how did all that kind of influence your feeling about the job? I mean, what was the job like? It sounds really intense. I mean, it sounds like you go to work and you got to be on high alert. And was that the way it was?
It was the best job in the world. Couldn't wait to get to work. And no, I just I loved it. That's why I stayed in uniform the whole time I was on a job. To me, the best place to be was out in the street, dealing with all the things that went on out there. Yeah. I never had an idea to be a detective or anything like that. I didn't I never worked vice. I didn't particularly care for that.
And how long were you at South Central at 77th?
Well, so I stayed there from 68, no, 63 to 68. So about 5 years.
And was there a community policing kind of a ideal back then? Were you
that didn't start
neighborhoods?
until much later. In fact, when I made sergeant in 76, I went back to 77, and that's when they had they called it, I can't remember, what was that? A community policing, where you were involved a lot with meetings and different things in the neighborhood that they thought were going to work, but eventually nothing really came of it. I mean, it sounded good at the beginning, and they would meet, but
Like the neighborhood watch.
yeah, and but those things, they're good to a point, but they expected us to get out and schmooze the people, and it just wasn't the atmosphere didn't work there. You know, you'd go to the meetings and they were all the old ladies from the neighborhood, and they'd have cookies and coffee and stuff, and you'd give them a presentation of some kind. And you know, it was good for them. It showed, I guess, that they were willing to do something with the community to make things better. But in the long run, it just didn't work out, and they finally abandoned it.
In the meantime, though, you guys were doing like the police athletic league and the boxing and all that. So, I mean, there was a lot of outreach, I think. I mean,
Oh yeah, there was always
baseball teams and that.
Yeah, particularly boxing. And it got. They ended up with a big boxing location over in Hollenbeck, and yeah, that became a big thing. But they always had. They called it the Police Athletic League, and it was a location where young kids could come and they could learn boxing, and they had basketball and volleyball and all those different things. So they had always had that. I guess they just, but you had to come. I mean, the kids had to decide they wanted to do that.
Right.
And come. And then later on, they started the cadet kind of a program where younger kids in high school and stuff would be part of it, and they would wear a uniform, and they had to learn to march and went to classes and stuff like that, trying to, I guess, make them see what it was like to be a police officer.
I suppose coming from Pittsburgh, everything, it's a hard life. It's hard weather. It's hard ground, hard people. I'm assuming that when you came to LA, you had a leg up in that toughness area compared to the sun-baked blonde surfer boy that wanted to be a cop. You know, I mean, I think it must have been great for your attitude. You know, it must have it must have not been overwhelming, you know.
Yeah, I had a different kind of, you're right, a different attitude. I had fighting was not a problem.
Right.
In high school and even when I got in the Navy, they were, like you said, they were fights, and once it was over, it was okay. Let's go have a beer together, and that's the end of it, you know. But when I got in the police department, the fighting opportunity was there all the time, and it didn't bother me. That was just part of my job. If you didn't get into a fight or two a day, boy, it was a slow day. It was.
You were early in the career, you would get the resisting situation. We would resist arrest, you'd have to handle your business. And then in the middle of your career, there was more organized resistance, would you say? And then by the time you're
like I said, they started with the demonstrations, and then there at the time, all the schools did the same thing. UCLA had a big demonstration, and that, you know, where they tore things down and burnt things, and then the high school started it. The high school in Hollenbeck did it. out in Venice, they did it. And, you know, so, yeah, that stuff. And then eventually that sort of went away too. I mean, you know, you can only do that stuff for so long. You know, well, in those days, you know, the policing idea was different. If you broke the law, we arrested you. And if it took a fight to get you under arrest, then that's what happened. And not like the things, unfortunately, that are going on today where the cops don't seem to be
Were you
allowed.
were you living in LA while you were policing? Is that was a requirement, right? Did you live
No,
in?
no, no,
Oh.
no. No, I lived, first place I lived was in Whittier, right near Gun Park. And then we moved to Cerritos, and then from there to La Mirada, and that was.
That's a long commute for you, Chuck.
Not, you know, it was at first, but because in Pittsburgh, you never drove very far to be any place. But yeah, I mean, to go to drive 25 miles to work one way, it first seemed to be really a long way. But you got to realize that was in the early 60s. The traffic was nothing like it is out there today. You know, I mean, you could zip in. I could make it to work in 20 minutes. You know, and so that was not a problem. It
Must have been nice to have some distance from your job as far as running into guys you arrested, maybe possibly at the supermarket or whatever, you know.
Well, yeah,
You don't want that.
No, that was one of the things that the community kept pushing, that the police officers should live in the community that they police, so that they can get to know everybody. Well, to me, that was not the right way to do it. I didn't want to know those guys and like somebody and end up having to arrest them for something.
Right.
That to me, that was far from what I thought was the best way to do it. And of course, LA was, the guys that lived in LA, most of them lived either in the harbor, San Pedro, or out in San Fernando Valley.
I see.
Yeah, the metropolitan area was not.
I like your attitude about it. I like the idea that you're separate from the people that you're policing. It gives you you don't have any judgment on those people. You're just handling your business. This idea of being in the community and, like you say, falling in love with a guy or shaking a guy's hand and then having to arrest him, it seems like that would muddy the waters quite a bit, you know. And
I always thought so, but unfortunately, in most communities, they have the opposite. They had been told that would be the best thing, you know, have the officers live there. I know in some cities, they even offered guys incentives.
Mortgages,
and stuff like that. I never thought that was, I mean, and I got to know a lot of people and knew a lot of guys just from being on the job. And sometimes you would have to arrest them, and they were good guys, or you thought they were good guys as far as you knew.
yeah,
And you ended up having to put them in jail. And I could see if you, because I got to know a lot of people in South Central, good people that really, you know, anytime they told me when I first went on the job, anytime anything came up for a vote for the police department, South Central voted for it overwhelmingly.
wow.
They wanted the police down there. They wanted, you know, they would vote raises or whatever that needed. So I always thought we had a pretty good rapport with them. Some yes and some no, I guess.
Was there a lot of that involved in like police work? Like, I'm interested in what a policeman thinks day to day about how to go about going out, you know, looking for people to arrest or looking for crimes being committed. Or was there a lot of interaction with people on the streets or families and things? How did that go? What was that like?
Well, the philosophy in LA at that time was aggressive police work. We went out and we hunted for bad guys to put in jail.
Right.
And, so you were out on the street, you stopped a lot of cars, you know, and you were responsible for the area that you worked. Within that division, they were broken down into smaller areas, and so you had to go in every morning, or not every morning, but prior to your starting your shift, you had to check all the crime reports from the night before to see what happened and record license numbers and descriptions of suspects and locations and cars and anything you could get, so that when you went out on the street and you would see things like, you know, guys that fit that description or license plates or whatever, and that's how you did your work. In between there, you handled your regular calls for service, but if you weren't doing that, you were out, you know, looking for whatever you could find. But and it was that was a plus for you as far as being an aggressive police officer. I'm not so sure that's the thought nowadays, but
I can tell you pretty much it's not.
I don't think so. And I can understand that the guys don't want to do that. It's not. It's a there's what can come of it can cost you your job and your livelihood. You got a family and stuff, so I can understand them not doing it. But yeah, it was just the opposite when I was on. That was how you graded it. A guy that was out there doing that he was what you considered a good cop. And the guys that didn't want to do that, they were slugs.
How many partners did you have during that time at 77?
Well, you had, you know, you changed fairly often. I mean, I got, you know, especially when you were new, you didn't know, they sort of put you with different guys to see how you worked out, and then you'd get to know some guys, and then you'd request all of you to work together. And yeah, I got in with a group of guys that we worked this one shift that started at 7 o'clock in the evening, and it was I guess all told probably about I don't know, maybe 20 or so that were assigned to that. And not everybody worked every night, and we got to be very, very good friends. And guys that a couple of guys that I became very close friends with, and one that's still one of the few that's still alive, and that I see him periodically. And yeah.
So at that point in your career, how many times have you fired your weapon?
You sure we should talk about that?
Well, I'm not asking you who you shot at. I'm just on the job. How many? And again, what I really kind of want to understand is how long did you work before, you know, you had to fire your first shot, and what was that like? And
I was only on a little over a year when I worked for Newton Street.
And what was it, responding to a burglary, or was it what was going on?
No, it was in the daytime. And the funny thing was, I worked with it in those, you know, just prior to me going on the department, that they integrated the department. Blacks and whites didn't work together before that.
Wow. Oh, wow.
So I worked one day with a guy, black guy, and he told me, I normally work the desk. He said, I haven't been on the field in years. They were short-handed though. He said, so just cool it. We're not going to get out and do a bunch of police work. We're just going to get through the day. I was a new guy, so whatever he said, that was what we did. So of course, typically cop thing, the first thing we did was went and got a cup of coffee, and we had a cup of coffee. I think we handled one call for a report at a school burglary, and then we got a shooting call, shooting in progress or something like that. And we get there, and it was an old kind of a Victorian home that had been divided into 4 different like apartments. And we get there, and there's a woman laying out on the front lawn with a bullet wound to her stomach. And she says, all I did was go to the door and ask this guy if he had a cigarette, and he shot me.
Wow.
That was in one of the apartments. So we go in, and my partner was at one side of the door. That's what he did. And I was at the other side. knocked on the door, police, and the guy started to open it, and he looked out and he saw us, and he started to close the door, and my partner kicked it open, and at the same time, the guy fired a shot, and it hit the edge of the door, and you know, they say how things slow down, and that's exactly what happened. I could see all this debris hit my partner in the face, and I thought he had been shot. But when he kicked the door, it knocked the guy back behind the door, so the door was in front of him. He was against the wall, and I already had my gun out. I just stuck it between the door jamb and the door and fired a couple shots. And he fell away from the door and onto a chair there. And I, of course, by that time, we looked in, there was another old guy. These were old, this was an older guy. At the time, I remember he was like in his 50s. That was a lot older than me. And looked over, and there was another guy, an old guy sitting in there, and he had his hands up, and his eyes were, you know, as big as saucers. And so we thought it was done, and I was looking at my partner, and I heard somebody behind me say, "Watch out, he's going to shoot." And I looked over, and the guy who had fallen across the chair was lifting the gun up, trying to get it up to get another shot. So I shot him a couple more times, and that was it. And the guy ended up only having one hand.
Oh, gee.
The hand that he had the gun in.
Wow.
And his name was Jesse James.
No
No
way.
shit.
Yeah. You know what? That's in the shootings that I was involved in. That's the only name I remember of the people I was involved with, just because it was so off. Yeah, his name was Jesse James.
So now, what was your program after work? Now, did that something you come home, you talk to Genevieve about, or do you just leave everything at home, at work, and be a different dude?
Yeah.
Is that was your goal, or?
Yeah, it was a different time. That was not. They took me back to the station, and I sat and waited for the investigators to come in, and I told them what happened, and they said, "Okay, go home," and that was the end of it.
No, I guess I mean, do you bring your job home every day, or did you
No, I
do a
don't
good
think I
job?
did. I don't think I did. I'm sure I told my wife what had happened, but I don't. I never really got into details about things that I would tell her things that were kind of exciting or maybe unusual or something like that. But I didn't. I don't think I did. I don't think I talked too much about what was going. Maybe that's why none of my sons wanted to be policemen. I don't know, but
You just didn't make it sound. You just didn't make it sound interesting enough.
yeah. Well, I think maybe that's true. The guys that I knew whose sons or daughters, or whatever, joined the police department, I think they were the kind of guys that would go home and go through the things with, and which would you know, interest someone who wanted to become a police officer. And that's
Well,
how I really got interested in it. When I worked with the cops, they were always telling me stories about things that went on. So
Right. Yeah, it was always clear when Dad came home that, you know, it was about being quiet and giving him a chance to rest. Because the only thing that I really remember my mom explaining to me is that your dad has been busy all day long with criminals, and you have to understand he needs some quiet. And that was kind of the general early on thing that just permeated. I don't remember us talking about it very much, but it was quiet when Dad came home.
yeah,
You know?
I don't. Yeah. Of course, the important thing was, did they take the garbage cans out?
Yeah.
That was the
Exactly.
main thing. Anyway.
There was the list of things that Mom would hand my dad, and then Dad would have to come into each room individually and deal with us. And it was that way. What was there again, after you go through something like that for the first time, what was the aftermath of that for you? Was there any thought process, or was that?
In those days, it was completely different. I mean, there was no real aftermath. I mean, I know nowadays the guys have to take time off and go see a shrink and all those things. We didn't do that. It was, the idea was you only shot people that needed to be shot, and if you did it and you did the right thing, there was nothing to worry about. So you didn't talk about it or worry about it or anything like that. It was just, it was over with. That was it.
See, I think there's a huge. I've listened to a lot of police officers. I had a police officer as a father, a stepfather, and I really feel like once you go to the gun, you can't hardly go back. And I think you guys did a great job back in the day of keeping it in your holster and being able to put your hands on somebody and be willing to do that. Be willing to put cuffs on guys first. And I think people are now so they take out their gun because they're afraid, and they take out their gun because they don't feel like they're strong enough to do what you guys did, or not willing to do what you guys did. And now you're waving that gun, you can't go back. It's going to go up, it ain't going down. It's
it's odd. That's exactly how I feel. That the big problem today, the officers get involved in these situations where they have to shoot someone because they're so afraid to put their hands on anybody and fight with them, because of the complaints and what, and unfortunately, when I was on, fortunately, the police department backed you, the city backed you. I mean, unless you were doing something wrong, but if you were just out there arresting people and end up in fights, which were common, that was not they didn't jump on you and want to fire you right away. And I think these guys today are afraid to do that, and nobody will believe it maybe, but the more you allow the bad guys to be bad guys, and the more bad they get, until you get to a point where you the only thing they can do is they end up shooting, and they are. I think they're afraid. I don't think the training is completely different now than it was when I was on. And I think if that wasn't like that, there'd be many less shootings.
Yeah.
Because you could handle most of the stuff we handled was physical. Yeah, we got physical, and people got hurt, and I got hurt, but that was the way you handled things, and people weren't. We got complaints, but I always felt there was a thought on the street that if you want to go to battle and you get your rear end beat, they thought that was part of the game, and so did we. I mean, if you resisted, that's part of what they do, and it wasn't the way it is today, where everything is a major deal, where the city's involved and all that kind of stuff.
I think there's a lot more respect in putting your hands on somebody than pointing a gun at them. I think it makes you look more manly or more authoritative.
Yeah, lately I remember doing all these things that were going on. They were interviewing a woman. I don't know, it was in Minneapolis or where, and she was saying, well, those cops think that they got to run everything, or they got to decide everything whenever they're, and that's exactly right. If you can't go, they told us right off the bat, if you're not in charge of the situation you're involved in, then you better leave, because you can't allow the citizens to decide what you do and when you do it. I mean, in regards to, them telling you, you have to make the decisions. You're the person that's in charge of that scene, then you've got to make those decisions.
And what's happening, Chuck, I mean, I read this thing that says cops are going to their gun faster in an event. So there's an event, the clock starts, you pull a guy over, and the gun's coming out way faster than it did.
They're too scared. I think they are anyhow. I mean, I think that's what happens. But I don't know. I don't know the kind of training they get now, and I don't know what the thinking of the individual officers are, or the department. I've been away from it so long that I really don't have any contact with it. My thinking is what I see.
Well, I remember very, very, this is so weird, but I remember very, very distinctly. I was very young, maybe 8 years old or 7 years old. And I remember the choke hold with the baton, and some fella passed away, broke it. I don't know what happened, but I just remember, okay, we're going to outlaw the baton, or, and I'm like, well, you're starting to take away things, and it's hard to, now there's
there's no steps to get to the gun. Now you just take
Exactly.
all those steps away and you're going to the gun, you know?
Now that we started off with the chokehold, they called it.
Yeah. Chokehold. That's right.
That was a bit of a, I'll admit, that was a sort of a violent thing, because what you were doing was cutting off a guy's breathing. And you know, when that happens, the response to that is pretty wild sometimes.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But and there was some deaths because of that. Well, they said it was because of that. You know, the department said that most of these guys were under the influence of PCP or something like that, which added towards what happened to them. Well, then they went to the carotid hold, which was much better. All it did was you applied pressure to each side of the neck,
Right.
and a guy went out in seconds.
Put him to sleep.
The thing was that one guy could handle a real badass, because there was a lot of guys. I kept myself in pretty good shape, but there was an awful lot of guys that could have cleaned my clock with no problem whatsoever.
Yep.
But once you could get that on, and I think that would have, that in today's situations also, these things that happen, if they had that now, you could get a guy under control, have him handcuffed before anybody knew what was going on. It was really something that happened I think that was a mistake, but you know, that's the trend of the way things started to go, and now it's completely.
My son Kyle, number one, he's a medic. He was a medic in the Army like you. And number two, when he came out, he spent a good amount of time trying to get on the police force, and it didn't work out for him, whatever reason. But you know, I always would ask him, you know, like, why do you want to do this? It's a tough gig now. It's not a prime time. You know, when I was a kid, you could go to the Halloween costume and you could be a policeman, or you could be a firefighter, or, you know, you could be, and I don't, you know, now kids aren't, it's like, what is the motivation to be a police officer now? You know, it's all kind of negative. You know, there's not a lot of upside to the game, you know, where you guys got respect and you guys felt like you were helping the community. I feel like, unfortunately, that's changed, and I don't know what the answer is. I don't know if it's to go to a military state where the military handles it, or whether it's to empower the cops. There has to be some empowerment to take that risk every day, in my opinion. I don't know if that's true or not, but you have to feel like you're going to go out there and handle your business. I mean, and if you don't,
you can't allow, just like lately with the burning and the looting and stuff that went on, and you could see in all those cities, the police stood by.
Yeah.
And I don't think it was the individual policeman that wanted to do that. It was the decision of the local government that you weren't going to do that.
right.
In my estimation, you can't do that, because, as I said, I found that it's just like raising your children.
Yeah.
If you don't discipline your children and make them know what the rules are,
Right.
their kids will get away with whatever they can get away with. And adults, unfortunately, are the same way in situations like that. The more that, and then when we were on the job, the first thing you did when you got a brand new guy out of the academy was try to get him into a fight. Just to see you had to know what the guy was going to do.
Yeah.
And you have young guys that would come out, and you'd get into a situation, and some guy'd be mouthing off, and they'd say, "You better stop that or you're going to jail." And then the guy would, and then he'd say, "Yeah," and then, "You better stop that or you're going to handcuff you with it." So you'd have to take them aside later on and say, "Look, you say that once,
And that's it.
maybe twice in certain situations, but if you're not going to do something, don't say it. Keep your mouth shut." You can't allow the bad guys, because the bad guys are the bad guys. They don't have any rules. They do whatever they want and whatever is good for them at the time. And the more leeway you give them, the more they take.
I really thought it was interesting what you said, where you have these level 1 criminals and you can handle those guys. And then if you let them get to level 2 and level 3 and level 4, you're in trouble.
Absolutely.
It ain't now that's a business, and now it's money, and now it's power, and you know, Now it's organization, you know, whereas a street level guy or some young kid is just a punk. Hey man, you know, let's just make some choices here. But once
Yeah.
you're a level 5 guy, you're not making any more choices. It's
Yeah, there's not a lot of disincentive to be a big time criminal in today. I mean, look at the dope dealers, and some of these guys are making millions and millions of dollars.
Are you talking about Congress, Mr. Willig, or are you talking about?
And
Let's not get them started yet.
Yeah, let's
Tommy.
not get started on
We're
that.
not ready for politics yet. I'll tell you a story. One of the greatest lessons of my life that I'll always remember, and it's, you know, it's funny the things you remember as a kid growing up, because my dad didn't talk a lot about his police work, and we knew, but every month I would assume, and I think I told you this a little bit before in another story, but we would get in the car and we would drive to whatever station my dad was working at, and we would pick up his check. And then we would go have like hot dogs and stuff or whatever. We'd go someplace and eat downtown, where, you know, all we knew is we were downtown, and it all seemed so much fun, you know. And so we're driving down one time, and my mom, as I recall, didn't always go with us, but there was this time that my mom was in the van, and we're all in the van, and we're driving down somewhere in LA, and this bus cuts us off and almost runs us off the road. And so my dad pulls up, drives up next to it, and says a couple things out the window, and you know, the bus driver doesn't give a shit. He's freaking. So the bus driver finally pulls over to stop at a stop, and my dad pulls up and cuts him off, gets out of the car and goes over, and they have a discussion. And then he comes back and gets in the car and shuts the door. And well, my mom is like, I can't believe you did that. What is wrong with you? You know, we got kids in the car. And my mom's halfway hysterical. And my dad turns to her and he says, and I'll never forget this, and I've used this throughout my lifetime. He looked at her and he said, how long can we let the assholes be assholes? Eventually you have to take control of that. And it was one of those things where, again, I thought it was like a cool cops and robbers thing, you know, whenever I was a kid. And that was, wow, my dad freaking took care of that shit. And, you know, and as I grew older, though, I realized that that's a way to live, you know. I mean, how long?
Philosophy.
Well, and I told you that then part of my life was, you know, I thought it was my responsibility to make sure that I let the assholes know that they were assholes, and, you know, confront that behavior. But it was, again, along with what you're talking about, Dad, there's a certain amount of you know, it seems noble, you know, that's the way the police were. You know, you run from the police, you get a beating.
yeah,
Okay, I'm a criminal, and I know if I ran, oh shit, man, got my ass kicked today. How come? Because you ran from the dumbass. You know,
Yeah.
you don't know how many times years ago when something would happen and some guy get knocked down, and somebody in the crowd would say, well, the officer told you to shut up. What did you think was going to happen? Everybody understood the rules of the road. You know, that was, and Chuck, you were talking about, I was going, when I was at 77th and we used to do that, we went to a place that had, they told me when I first worked there, the best chili dogs in town. And it was at Florence and Normandy.
Oh my.
That's where the Rodney King riots started.
Yeah, right. That's a.
We'd go down there and we'd go to this place and get chili dogs and a Coke. And I never thought we were in a bad spot. Or, I mean, I never really worried about being down there. It was always at night. And Mom would go with us, and as many of the boys that we had at the time. And yeah, so there was a different feeling amongst the cops and I thought, and the local people. Unfortunately, people that wanted to promote problems, I think, took over. And
Did your feelings change as you became a leadership role, being a sergeant and all that stuff? Did it mess with your head now, having to deal with everyone's experience besides just your experience? Or
I don't think it did. I mean, not that I don't think so.
that's great.
I think and I had some good trained guys that trained me when I was made sergeant about what was important. And the important thing was for you to take care of your men. That's the guys that work for you. That was your biggest job. Keep them out of trouble, make sure you are there and handle situations when they get out of hand and things like that. That was your biggest job.
So when you're starting to, when you're in a situation where I guess at some point you start thinking about, you know, taking the sergeant's test or moving Oh, whatever those situations were where you were going to promote up, then you went to Metro. Can you tell us a little bit about what that was, that decision making was like, and what Metro looked like to you as you were coming aboard?
Well, when I first went there, that was in '68. No, yeah, '68. There was only 70 guys in the division, and they were a supplement to stations that were having a particular crime problem that they didn't have enough of guys to handle, and then we would go in and we would flood the area with cops and try to help them out with that kind of. Plus, in those days we did bank stakeouts and liquor store stakeouts and markets and things like that. We did a bunch of different things. Well, in the early '70s in LA, they had guys that became fashionable. They'd take over buses. When the bus would stop, bunch of guys would go and they'd rob everybody. It was like the old train robberies back in the old West. And it started happening all over the city. And so we didn't have enough. We only had 70 guys. We didn't have enough of guys to handle it. So what they did was they put out and had each station send a couple of guys in. We ended up with a couple of hundred. And the idea was we'd follow the buses around and finally we stopped that. But they found out that worked so well that they expanded the division to be, I don't know, maybe 200 guys in it. And eventually and we went into platoons that we were like a military type thing. One of them ended up being SWAT. SWAT was part of that was later on. And then they gave us cars to take home because we would respond from home directly to stations or directly to, I went out to one time they had a big fire out in the San Fernando Valley. They had a dam up in, I can't remember what part of LA it is. And it broke and flooded the whole area down below, and we had to go in and work that. We responded to those kinds of things. So it developed, and then during the '70s when the demonstrations were going on, we were the ones that handled most of those because we had several hundred guys that were free to do that kind of stuff, and we got a tremendous amount of training. And I watch some of these guys out there today. They apparently get no training in anything like that anymore. I guess nothing like that has happened for so long that they just they obviously aren't trained and don't know
what kind of training was that?
We would go. It was, you have to learn how to form a skirmish line, what we called it, and you have to learn that everybody has to stay in line. You can't get out ahead. And we used to have, the way they did it, they'd have a group of maybe 5 or 6 guys behind the line, and if you had somebody out in the protesters or what was throwing rocks, or sometimes there'd be guys in there that were kind of the head men, they'd be ordering guys to do stuff. So what we do is pinpoint them, and all of a sudden the line would open up and these 6 guys would dash into the group, grab this guy, cuff him up and drag him back in. And so, and you had to train at that. You had to learn, actually, it takes a lot of self-control, when you're having things thrown at you like that, to keep in the line and not to rush out by yourself. And so we trained in that. We did a lot of training with the Marines down at Camp Pendleton. Huh. I would think during that time, at least once a month, we would have what they called a training day, where we would do nothing but train and go through and then we had shooting training and different things like that, and how to clear a building and all that stuff. But a lot of it was in there was wedge formations and, you know, arrest circles and all these different things that they taught you how to do.
Huh.
So, yeah, it
Was that it, did you like being at Metro, and how long were you there for?
oh, I loved it. I loved it. Yeah,
Was
we did different things. That the bad, well, bad and good thing about it was you could get off at midnight and they'd say, okay, you got to be back at 8 o'clock in the morning, you know, or we get up at 2 o'clock in the morning and they say you have to be back at 8. It changed all the time depending on what was going on and where they needed you. That's where they gave us the take home cars, but we had to respond in situations like that. But it was great. I mean, you probably learned more in the 8 years that I was in Metro than I probably learned in the rest of the time I was on the job.
I think it's like I think it's really a cover your ass thing now. I think that if we train our officers to get in the wedge formation, and the wedge formation hurts somebody, then the city's responsible. We can sue the city because they were taught to do that, or the chokehold, or the circle. You know, that's what's the scariest thing. You know,
everything comes down to civil liability.
Yes.
They don't want to. They'd rather, like they did in Minneapolis, they'd rather give up a police station and let them burn it down.
Can you imagine?
To defend it, and maybe somebody ends up getting hurt.
Right.
Yeah, the whole idea has changed. And why a young guy would go into being a police officer today is beyond me. Unless you're at some maybe sheriff's office way out in the boondocks or something like that, then you don't have to deal with that stuff. But anybody in a big city, any cop in a big city, I don't know how they do it anymore. I really don't.
So you became a sergeant, took the test, became a sergeant, and where did you end up? What was your first gig for?
Well, I went back to 77, and that's when the community policing stuff was going on. And I stayed there for 4 years. And then I transferred to downtown Los Angeles, Central Division. And again, I went down there thinking, I don't know how this is going to work out. And it was one of the best times I had on the job. It was, you know, downtown in those days. I haven't been in downtown LA for a while, but in those days it was Main Street was like the Wild West. It was that was sort of a Skid Row kind of an area, and we had, you know, the bars that in the north end were the Hispanic bars, and then in the middle you had the black bars, and then down a little further you had all the guys in black leather and
the bikers
with no rear end in them, and you know, and yeah, it was everything in the world was going on down there. They had the X-rated movie theaters, and so it was, yeah. And the good thing about there is, I never liked working the midnight day shift, because if you're in a residential neighborhood, 2 o'clock the liquor stores and everything closes down. Man, there's nothing going on at all. But if you're downtown, it's lit up all night long, and there's people out all night. There's things going on 24 hours a day down there. So I really enjoyed working down there.
Makes the shift go faster, huh?
Oh, it does, absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
What was the best thing about being a sergeant at that time?
Yeah, I don't know. You were kind of, you know, you were kind of on your own. You didn't have to handle radio calls and stuff like that. You weren't supposed to get involved in any arrests, but you know, sometimes it was avoidable. Yeah, I know it was. You weren't pinned down like the guys in the radio car, or you know,
Right.
Yeah.
you were could kind of roam around and do what you wanted to.
What was the political climate by then? I mean, because I know that eventually there was the Christopher Commission and stuff happened, and all that stuff.
Well, that was after the '65 riots that they had that, and but they, that when the government took over, that happened way after when they gave all the directions to the police. Well, that and after I was retired, I was involved in that. And they changed a lot of things, like they had us change the leather gear, your holster and all that stuff is called a Sam Brown. That's the name of it. And they said those look too militaristic, so you have to get rid of those. So they went to Velcro, and we called it the Bruce Brown. And you had to get away with that. I had a leather jacket that I had bought that we wore, and they wouldn't let you wear that. Excuse me, I'm sorry. That's
all right.
That's a ex-LA County Sheriff, one of my golfing buddies that usually comes over and has coffee with me a couple of times a week.
See, fucking sheriffs, they're always getting in the way.
That's what I tell him, but he says the same thing about LAPD.
So let me just kind of get to where you get to the point now. You're a sergeant, and how much between there and retirement are you?
I made sergeant. I had 14 years on the job, so that was about halfway through.
Okay. And how did that sequence of next, like, when did you move from place to place? How many years were you?
I stayed at Central for almost 8 years, and then kind of got into a situation where
Okay, back up, and just let loose with that story. I want to know.
Yeah, there was some guys that they thought weren't doing the right thing. I mean, they just didn't follow the rules. Not anything bad, but they just. And then we had 4 sergeants that were kind of on their side. They called us the Gang of 4, and finally they did a mass transfer. They transferred out about 20 or 30 guys, and I was one of them, and I was transferred to Southwest, which is the area around USC and the Coliseum. And I worked that for about a little over a year, and then I went to Hollenbeck. I'm good friends with the captain there, Pat McKinley. I don't know if you know who. And he got me into Hollenbeck because I knew I was getting ready to retire. In fact, I was going to stay on the job until my youngest son Gregory graduated high school, and that would have been in June or May. I got to January, and I said, I can't do it anymore. It had just not it wasn't the job that it had been, and I just wasn't having a fun time anymore. So I decided it was time to leave.
What are the couple, if you have a couple of your best fun stories about your police time? I know you were involved in some pursuits that have some infamy to them, and there's a story about
White Blazers
saving a kid that was in the bathtub, and just some stories like that.
I don't know how you remember that stuff.
I do. I remember again those small things. So what were the things that you go, that was the best of the best,
Yeah, I mean, the thing with the little girl that was, I think she had some kind of a seizure in the bathtub. She was only about 5 or 6 years old, and we get the call there, and this was in 77th, and mother was screaming and yelling. The ambulance was a while away, so we decided, well, we'd take her. So my partner was driving. I got in the back seat and started giving her mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. And as we're going towards the hospital or in that direction, the ambulance is coming the other way. So we stopped and met in the middle, and they took her over and ended up continuing, and she was okay. She made it. But that's one of the good things that happened to you that you remember.
Did you deliver any babies?
No, I did when I was in the Navy, though. Yeah, one time in the Navy, I delivered a baby. Yeah, and
Did you deliver any of your own sons?
it's easy. You don't do anything. The woman does all the work, so all you do
Yeah.
is come here and catch, and that's
Right.
about it.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know. Some of the things I did. I was going to tell you when I was working Central Division. They used to do a lot of movies down there because they could make it look like New York and different things, or they were using the big buildings and stuff. And one night, about 2 o'clock in the morning, I hear all music blaring. What the heck's going on? So I head towards what was on this main street at 7th, and I get there, and the whole intersection is filled with people. And what it was Janet Jackson was doing a video. And
That's awesome.
not dancing in the street. Well, when they did that stuff, they were supposed to have policemen as security. They hired them off duty security guys. So I got a hold of the security guys, and he said, well, there's only 3 of us. They wouldn't hire anymore. We can't control this many. So I told the director, people who was in charge, I said, you have to stop this. Well, come on. And he wanted to walk me away and bullshit me while she was doing her dancing in the street. So finally, I just walked away from him and walked right in front of the camera, put my hands up and said, stop. And it all came and I can't remember the song that she was doing, but it finally, it was one of those like MTV videos.
That's great.
I can't remember, the song is right there, but I can't remember what it was.
And they didn't leave that part in the video.
They should have left it in.
No, yeah, well, obviously not, yeah. But and the next thing you know, she jumped into a limousine and was gone. Boy, she didn't hang around. She didn't want to have nothing to do with it. So I shut it down because they didn't have enough of people.
I think that it must be very difficult from a psychology perspective to work. If you're going to work a 30-year career, there's bound to be changes and evolutions in the neighborhoods and in the politics and in the, every 4 years there's a new politic. And, I feel like to have a successful police force or have anything, you have to assume things are going to change instead of holding on to the old methods for so long that they become a liability ultimately. And I just feel like if they could do that, if guys could focus on, okay, we want to stay ahead of the curve, I think the job would be so much better and easier. Not easier, but I think as things change, it's got to be a betrayal to you. Oh, I can't do this now. That makes me less effective, and I can't do this, and it makes me less effective. And I never did that. Why am I getting punished for something another guy did? And I just feel so bad. When my son was going through the process, I would pray and pray and pray because I was like, please give me some clarity on how this job is going to work, because as a teacher, I know exactly what's going to happen. And I know that I better be ready to change. I better know what the best song is. I better know what the websites are. I better know what the kids are dressing. I better know all that stuff if I want to stay relevant in the classroom. And I feel like they didn't give you that chance. They didn't prepare you guys for that. They just took away. They never replaced it with anything meaningful. And maybe I'm being philosophical, but I think it must have been hard for you at the end when you can't even do that last 6 months because it's time to go.
Yeah.
That's rough, man. To me.
And it got to the point where some of the young officers, I'd be talking to them about saying, hey, you got to get out and do more. You got to make more stops. You're right. And there's no quota, but if a guy doesn't make so many arrests or write so many tickets in a month, that he's not doing his job. That's
right.
That simple. And it got to the point where these guys would say, you can't do that kind of stuff. Every time you get involved in something, your internal affairs is investigating it. And in LA, they have the idea that no matter what anybody complains about, they will take a complaint, and they can be with, I'll tell you, One I remember when I was in Metro, a guy they came down and investigated. The woman said he stopped her for a traffic violation and he had devil eyes. And that was, I'm serious. That was that they got to that point. They were so worried about somebody complained they couldn't handle that kind of stuff that they didn't take a complaint because someone, no matter how bizarre it was,
Yeah.
I had complaints against me when I was on a day off.
Oh my God.
You know, they would, yeah. I mean, and what they would do is the guy would say, well, did you get the officer's names? No. How about his badge number, his serial? No. And so they'd bring him into the station where they had the pictures of all the guys that worked there. And they'd say, well, do you see him up there? Well, what are they going to do? They say, oh, yeah, it's him. Oh, yeah, he's one of them, too. Well, they did it to me a couple of times when I was on a day off.
Yeah.
They realized that was
Takes the wind out of your sails. I mean,
working that yeah. My biggest thing, and I used to think it years ago, the department itself doesn't, they want to do stuff for the community, but they don't want to tell them what our role is. I mean, you know, tell people even now, listen, if a policeman stops you and he does something wrong, okay, keep your mouth shut, do what he tells you to do, and when it's all over, get a hold of a sergeant, go to the station and make a complaint against him. But and what they do now is people think that, well, if I don't like what he's doing, or I didn't commit a traffic violation, I don't have to pay attention or do what he tells me to do. And that's where all these things start, you know. And I think years ago, I thought the police department should come out and say, this is look at it from our perspective.
Yeah.
You don't know how many times I almost shot guys because you'd stop them and they'd be reaching down under their seat. You'd think, oh, he's going for a gun. And the guy, it's some guy trying to hide a can of beer or something like that, you know. So you have to tell people, don't do stuff like that. You know, I mean, that can end up getting yourself killed or hurt pretty badly. And I think the department is lax, and they still seem to be in that mode. They will not come out and try to give their side of the story, because I'm sure there's a lot of people who will say, yeah, that sounds reasonable to me. You know, there are some that aren't going to go with the program no matter what it is. They're not going to listen or want to do anything. So, but but there's no doubt you have to go with the new things that are happening, and you got to realize what the tempo of the community and what the thinking is, or you're going to be left in the dirt. There's no doubt about that.
well, maybe it's the community's fault. Maybe the community, as they evolve, need to give you guys some kind of, they have to give something back. It has to be a negotiation. It's a social contract. I pay your salary. I expect you to pull me over when I do something wrong. I expect you to come when somebody's climbing in my window. I expect you to be here, you know, and so I have to give you something for that besides the paycheck.
I think most of the people really do feel that way, but there are so many agitators and people that make a living out of having things disrupted that they end up gathering people that maybe they're on the fence in the one way or the other. But I always thought that most of the people, when I worked South Central, they were good people, and you could go and talk to them. And I never drove around. The only time we were really scared is whenever the bad Black Panthers, and they were out there ambush cops and stuff, and you had to really be careful then. But prior to that, I never felt really in danger down where I worked. I thought everybody was good, except the bad guys are always the bad guys. That's how I always looked at it. You know.
That's awesome. Thank you for
There was a funny moment in my dad and I's evolution. I can remember at one point because we didn't talk a lot of political things after a while, because we figured, you know, in those kind of circles it was tough to be a left-winged hippie radical kid like I was, and you know, and talk to the conservative man. But eventually there was a moment when I had said something to my dad in kind of a little bit of we were arguing something, and I said something about being prejudiced and all that working down there in South Central, there has to be some prejudice. And it was really interesting. It was I don't know if I've ever told you this, Dad, but it was a moment where my dad looked at me and kind of in shock. And I thought, well, first of all, you're looking at me like you don't know what I'm talking about, which is odd. And secondly, let me explain this to you. And we had a conversation about some of the things that I heard growing up as a little kid that obviously I didn't know what that was, but it was in reference to the, again, being in a culture of people that, there was some things being said that, there was some anger and some upset and stuff. And so I didn't have a frame of reference. But the greatest moment in that conversation was my dad said, it's really not that way, Chuck. He said the bad guys were the bad guys, and then the rest of the people that lived in those communities were good people, and we had relationships with those people, and we talked to those people, and they were happy to have us there, and keeping their streets safe and keeping their kids able to walk to school. And that was a real enlightening moment in terms of understanding the difference between it wasn't the difference between the blacks and the whites and the Mexicans and the Asians. It was a difference between good guys and bad guys. And I understood for the first time that's where the angst and the anger came from. It was the bad guys, and that was a neat moment to understand that about a career cop who, again, you didn't know a lot about what that was all about. But it would seem easy to me for people to assume that if I'm busting black guys because I work in 77th Division, that I don't like black guys. I mean, it would follow that people could say that, but those are the bad guys. Those, they could have been black or brown or green or whatever. They were the bad guys, and they would have got arrested. So, I thought that was a neat moment in my life to understand that.
Yeah. And I think that goes back to what I said about the department, maybe explaining to people like that. When I worked 77, it was all black. There was a small a couple of blocks of Mexicans that lived down in Watts. But other than that, there was no white people or any other, no Asians or anything like that. So when you stop somebody, it was going to be someone who was black. I mean, it wasn't that you picked them out. It was just that's all. In fact, every once in a while they'd you'd stop somebody and say, "You just stopped me because I'm black." And I got to the point where I'd say, "Wait a minute," and I'd look back and forth and stuff. Say, I looked for a white guy all day long, but I couldn't find one.
That's awesome.
I never felt that way. You're right. I think that's the way. If the police are that way today, there are good guys and there are bad guys, and that's the only way you look at it. And the people in between are the poor victims. It doesn't matter if they're black or they're white or they're Mexican or whatever they are. They're the victims. They're not the bad guys. So I never felt that way, but I don't know. I'm getting old and senile now, so I'm not sure.
Older and wiser.
I'd love to kind of finish up with an opportunity to talk a little bit about the fact that you raised 6 sons, and obviously I'm one of them, so we can do me last. But it'd be interesting to have you kind of comment on what that was like with going to football games and being that, again, seeing your kids grow up to now we're all grown men, and we got to share a lot of things that a lot of people in smaller families don't get to. So what was that like?
You did good, Chuck, by the way. Let's start with that. You did good.
Thank you. I think I hold the record for being at more football games in my lifetime than anybody else. All the way up into the pros. So I don't know how many football games I've been to, but having 6 boys, people would always say that, "Oh my God, that," and unfortunately, probably it was more my wife that might have taken the brunt of that, not me. And I thought we had a pretty easygoing situation at home. We had a few bumps here and there, but for the most part, everything worked out pretty well. I never thought that we had a major problem, or I've obviously with five of them playing college football, a couple going into the pros, and I mean and they've all. I'm very proud of what they've turned out to be, and how they've grown into good men, and that's one of the biggest things. They've always been good family men, taking care of their families, worked hard. Sometimes at jobs I didn't understand, but no, it was. And from my point of view, it was a good life, and it was couldn't have asked for anything more. And I think your mom probably thought the same thing. I think she probably a little different approach to it, but she was always extremely proud of you guys and what you did. I remember whenever the twins were born, and we'd go out. They had I don't know, well, you're probably too young. We had a double stroller for them to sit in. We would go into a market or something, and people would say, "Oh my goodness, look at those twins! Aren't they cute?" And Mom would always take you by the hand and say, "And this is their big brother Chuck." We always made sure that everybody was equal. That's why I ended up with the 2x4 smack on both of them, because all things were equal.
Were you trying for a daughter, Chuck? Is that why you guys had 6 kids? Because most people, when they have twins, that's it. There's no more after the twins, because that's a killer.
Trying to be good Catholics.
Okay.
until I realized that this can get out of hand.
Yeah. Oh man.
Yeah, the funny thing we never thought until, like I said, until I got to 6, and I thought, because I had ended up having to work 2 jobs for 2 years, and because it was raising, especially 6 boys, people were always saying, "My God, how do you feed them?" And it was a chore to make enough money to get. Then they all went to Catholic school, and that was more expensive, and it was as good as to me. It was as good as it could be. I think everything.
Well, they're all really different. I think that's the experiment. Is they all get raised in the same house, they eat the same dinner, they have the same clothes, and they're all different.
And me and my wife used to talk about that. How could they be like that? How
impossible.
could they be so different and all be here, and they were subject to the same things growing up, but how could they be so different? Their personalities run the gamut of
All different.
Yeah, Mr. Swiss, my Gregory's brothers called him Mr. Swiss because he would never take a stand on anything or say anything bad about anybody. And
That's kind of how I was too.
Oh, geez.
well,
Yeah. Talk about a pendulum from you to Greg. I mean, like.
yeah, and with Bob in the middle.
Yeah. Perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, we laughed because it was like whatever I got into, Chris and Craig learned from, and they got better. And then Bob, whatever he got into, the 2 younger ones. But life changes a lot. I mean, there was, like I said, my dad was working 2 jobs, and gone a lot. So yeah, my mom was responsible for that day-to-day picking up and dropping off, and but we never missed a meal, man. There was always a full-on meal on the table, and my mom, would start picking up or start dropping off one kid, and then by the time she got done dropping off the last one, she was picking up the first one, and we were, all in the car, and I mean, I'm sure it was just way more trouble than I knew it was back then. There was a lot of
logistics.
You guys turned out well. It was particularly her doing, because she and I don't, obviously you could have easily, having 6 of them, you could have overrun her, I guess, at some point, but that never happened. And I think because of what you were, the way they thought about things, that wasn't the thing to do. And their mom was a good lady that just was able to handle them all.
Well, I think even kids know that it's an extraordinary situation, and the respect is there for the efforts, and you can see people. It wasn't like you guys were checked out. You guys were involved. You guys didn't.
Oh, God,
You
yeah.
never said, "Hey, we can't." It was always, "Okay, let's find a way." And from being an outsider, I just love just looking at the whole, like, you got Chuck where his is like this all the time with, and then you got Greg on the other side. It's kind of like always listening and seeing. And then you got Bob, who's got that little twinkle in his eye. He knows he's going to start some trouble, but he's doing it with a smile. Chuck would start trouble, but it would be with that face like this, and Bob would be like, "Hey, let's get into trouble," like, and it was like this perfect arc, the perfect arc of personality. I mean, it's unbelievable. Then Greg would always be, hiding back there looking and, not causing any trouble.
Bob and his family came to visit me a couple of years ago for Thanksgiving. And what I do for anybody who comes for Thanksgiving, there's a restaurant here that has a special meal for Thanksgiving, and that's generally where we go. So Bob and the family came, and they did a few things a couple of days before, and finally, the day before, I said to Bob, "Listen, the only thing I have to say, when we go to the restaurant, can you wear shoes and socks?" He said, "I didn't bring any shoes and socks."
Yeah, flip-flops always.
He had nothing else. That was, and he's a grown man with two grown kids, and that was, and to Bobby, that was, well, why would you need shoes?
Well, I
So I
remember
made him buy a pair of shoes and socks so he could wear it to Thanksgiving dinner. So
he was probably squirming around with those things on, like, "Ah." Well, I remember, unfortunately, in my 20s, hanging out with those guys, and we would go out to a pub or whatever. I make sure I have shoes on. My feet are precious. And Bob, we would get in a skirmish, or there would be a little confrontation. Bob, I looked down, and Bob would be in his toes were exposed. I was like, "This guy's crazy."
he never, he wore flip-flops all the time.
Even in the snow.
Yeah, even in Washington, it was cold up there, and Colorado, it snows and everything, and wear shorts all the time, and
He's the closest you got to Tarzan,
What's that?
I said he's the closest son you have to Tarzan.
Yeah.
All right, so let's
was
move.
all good.
What's that?
It was all good. There was a few bumps along the way, but all in all, I couldn't be happier or prouder than what I am with my family.
What was it like having a son play in the NFL for 14 years?
Yeah, it's like 14 years. After a while, I kind of got used to it. I mean, that was just his job. Luckily, we got to go all over the country to see football games. I think I've been all the way from New York to San Diego seeing football games and all in between. So that, and then whenever they played in college, USC and Washington, they played all over the place. Rice, Greg went to Rice, and got to see him play and all over the place. So yeah, it was a good time.
Who was the best athlete?
Oh, no, I wouldn't get into that one at all. I will not answer that
The
question.
10-foot pole. Do not touch that.
No.
That's awesome.
Well, I was lucky to have a family that you were all good, excellent athletes in the time you were little in Pop Warner or little league baseball and stuff all the way through. So
I told my wife that. I said, I'm really glad my son was athletic, because if he was the right fielder or the worst player on the team, or, the bench warmer, it would be hard to go to those games, like, and sit there and watch him on the bench. Like, God gives you what you can handle. There's no doubt about it. And thank God my son was a nice player, because it would have been awful to have a bench warmer.
Chuck was, I don't know how old he was. He was playing Little League. We still lived in Whittier at the time. and he was playing in Little League, and he made the All-Star team. And they had a game down at a field. I don't even remember checking. I was down near Artesia Boulevard or someplace like that.
It was like Buena Park or something.
Yeah, okay. And we went to the game, and we were sitting out in the center field kind of bleachers, and Chuck got up and hit a home run, and it landed right at our feet. In the stand. It went, yeah, it was one of those things, you know, and you'd
That's
almost
great.
couldn't write it any better than that. So
That's cool.
That's a great story. I tell that every once in a while, and because what follows is I think that might have been the game you choked out Chris.
no,
No.
Gregory was playing that.
Oh, okay. But that was like the beginning of the end of my baseball career, because the next week I hit a home run in the All-Star game and came back, and my normal position was shortstop, but because it was the All-Star game, they had some pretty good players, and so they put me in left field, which was all fine. But the next week we came back to practice, and I'll never forget this kid, Mark Hander, big 6-foot kid at 12 years old, throwing batting practice, and he's up there pitching, and he throws one right into my arm, and it gives me a hairline fracture in my arm, and that was the end of my All-Star experience. And the next week we're driving up when it should have been the All-Star game. We're driving up to Big Bear, I think, or someplace, or Lake Tahoe, to go on vacation.
Yeah.
And that was I think the last real time that I played baseball. It was so I got to hit a home run that landed at my parents' feet.
Yeah, that was a story you couldn't write that any better than it turned out.
That's awesome. Well, I appreciate you taking the time, Dad. That was awesome to.
Well,
just
thank
get a
you,
little bit of
guys. I
insight,
appreciate
and
the good talk.
we're gonna finish up. Tommy at the end. Tommy goes through and has some quick questions that some off the cuff answers that he'll throw at you, and we'll finish up with that, and then we'll buzz out.
All right, thank you.
Okay,
Go ahead,
ready?
Tom. You ready?
Okay.
Ready.
So Elvis or Jerry Lee Lewis?
Elvis.
Cool jazz or rock and roll?
Oh, cool jazz.
Ford or Chevy?
Ford.
Coke or Pepsi?
Pepsi.
Whiskey or tequila?
Whiskey.
Life with modern technology or without it?
Ooh, that's a tough one.
Yeah.
Probably with.
Okay. Baseball or football?
Oh, got to be football.
Batman or Superman?
Oh, Batman.
That's awesome. And World War II or Vietnam?
Oh, World War II.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one. I appreciate it. Those are always good.
How about the right hand column, Tom? You can give him the
I
right
think
hand.
that's all I see, Coach. What do you mean?
We're looking for a desert. Your 5 desert island albums, Dad. If you got stuck on a desert island, what 5 albums or what 5 pieces of music would you want?
Oh, son, my biggest thing was I like jazz.
So who are your guys?
Well, obviously the 4 freshmen that was our big thing, me and your mom. And I liked Dizzy Gillespie and Coltrane and
Wow.
Ramsey Lewis and Dave Brubeck. I grew up during the 50s, so I liked all the 50s music, but I never was a music really into it, where I could remember names of songs and albums and things like that. So no.
So who would you like to meet that you haven't met? Anybody in the world, or anybody in history for that matter? I'm a history teacher.
Wow. Probably Albert Einstein.
Nice. That's a good call. Interesting dude.
Yeah.
Do you have any regrets about life or about anything?
Oh, yeah. Well, only that I think things happened situations within my family and that I should have done more to help out, and I didn't. Luckily, nothing really bad came of it, but I sometimes I should have been more involved. Maybe.
Okay, that's a great question. That's a great answer. What would you like to be known for in 50 years? Or legendary or infamous? I don't know. Whichever.
Yeah, I hope people think I'm, well, not everybody, but I think I was a good policeman.
Nice.
I think I was a good cop.
So do you know who Jeff Bezos is? The guy from Amazon, the
Yeah.
richest guy in the world. So if you had Jeff Bezos money, what would you spend it on to make your country or your community stronger?
Oh boy.
Where should the money go, Chuck?
Well, there are a lot of people that need money, that need help and need money, but I'm afraid that a lot of it is given out without any restrictions to it. In other words, I see here where I live, they constantly have giveaways with food and clothing and stuff, but there doesn't seem to be any. In other words, you just walk up and say, "Yeah, I'll take that," and you walk away with it, which maybe keeps the people that really need it. They don't get as much as they should. Some people are getting it that maybe they shouldn't have it at that time. Yeah,
Right.
I would love to. To me, I live better now than I ever thought I would. So I have, if I had a ton of money, yeah, I would give it away to people. But I would make sure that I would think I would be personally involved to make sure that the right people got it.
I like it.
That would be the thing.
I like that. I think Jeff Bezos is probably very disconnected from the world.
You can get that way. I can, it's like now when I think of what it was like when I was a kid. I guess if you saw it, we'd have been poor, but I never thought we were poor.
Right.
So I developed from that into what I am now, which is really in good condition as far as finances and things go. So you live to the level that you as your finances go and your social standing goes. I think you rise to that level or drop to it, whatever. That's why I think these people that are homeless, and I seen it when I worked in downtown LA, they get to that point where that's their life, and they don't. There's no incentive for them to do anything better. They go from place to place to get their food, and that's about it. They don't mind sleeping in a cardboard box, and after a while, it just becomes the routine to them. And I think that's what happens, unfortunately, people.
I think I think when our one fan listens to this podcast, I think it's going to be so apparent how important attitude is. Because I feel like, we were talking about, a tough job, and you say, I love it. You say it was exciting. You say it was fulfilling. You use all these real positive, I'm sure there was really, really bad days, but that's not the first thing that pops into your brain. And I just, it's been a thread for this whole hour and a half or however long we've been together. I just keep hearing that saying, oh yeah, I had 6 kids and it was great. It seemed good. Now I'm sure the kid broke a kid's nose and a kid punched one of the boys punched another boy. And I'm sure the other kid, and it was just, yeah, it's good. Yeah. We lived a good life. It was a good life. Everything was good. I really, really think people are going to be struck by your attitude and how powerful it is and how consuming it is. Let's see, 2 more. Who's one person who made an impact on your life that doesn't know it? It's kind of.
Yeah, that's a toughie. To be honest with you, it may sound kind of hokey, but my father.
Yeah.
He in our family, you worked hard. First thing you thought about was feeding your family, making sure they had clothes and a place to live, and then everything came after that. And I think that my boys all have done that too. They've all been good providers for their families and took care of their children and their families, and so I think him, and he would have never known it because he was an old German guy, and you never really talked about personal things. So
Yeah.
that he probably never knew.
Well, I'm sure glad it's changed, Chuck. I'm sure glad. I'm sure glad we get to. I'm sure glad we get to talk to you and tell you how much we love you and all that stuff for sure. What's left on your bucket list? Because it sounds like you've done a lot of things. You've been a lot of places. Is there anything that you want to do that you?
No, not really a whole lot. I always thought I'd like to go to Australia, visit Australia, go on to the outback or whatever they call that. And
Yeah.
look at things. But other than that, not really. I've never been big on traveling and stuff like that. But so that other than that, nothing really. I think I probably got everything that I need and more right now. So I'm doing okay.
Yeah, you seem pretty blessed for sure.
I am.
Outstanding.
That's absolutely true. I am very blessed.
Well, cool. Well, we'll wrap it up with that. And like I said, thanks for coming on and spending time with us.
Oh,
and being
thank
so
you, guys.
forthright.
If nothing else, it was nice to be able to sit and talk with you. That was-
Absolutely.
Yeah, good. Well, I'll keep you posted on the availability of the podcast. And
Okay, good. Yeah, Bob set up my telephone that I can get those things on.
Nice.
The iPhone, I heard you got an iPhone. That's pretty
Oh
cool.
my God. It's
Well,
overwhelming and so neat that it does things. And that's why I didn't want one, because it can then take over your life, and I can see that it can do that. Boy, I'll tell you, it's
Before my grandfather passed away, I was hanging out with them, and she spoke about that. Because when he was born, they had a party line, then they had their own phone, then they had the long cord and one phone in the house, and then I remember when there was a cordless phone with the big steel antenna that you pull out, he would carry that around when he was mowing the lawn. He just thought that was the greatest thing ever, you know. And then he got a cell phone, and he was just like, "Oh, I can't," but with none of this smartphone stuff, just a cell phone.
yeah.
He's like, "Oh my God, I can be anywhere, and they can reach me, and this is fantastic and so safe." And then when the very first iPhone came out, he's like, "Okay, this has gone far enough. There's no buttons. How do I call somebody? There's no buttons on this thing. Like, how does it work?" It was such an interesting conversation, for that generation to go through that technological thing. So when you got an iPhone, I was like, "That's awesome. Here we go." And you can just talk to it. Call Chuck,
Yeah.
call
No,
Tom.
you know what? I know it can do that, but that doesn't seem right. That doesn't compute to be able to tell the telephone to call somebody. I don't do that. I know it can do it, but I don't ever use it. So,
Yeah, that's cool.
All right.
Thank you very, very much, man.
well, thank you, guys. Again, I appreciate the time, and it was a good discussion.
All right. Cool. All
All
right,
right.
Dad. Talk to you soon. See ya.
All right, bye-bye.